Good evening. Good to see everybody out tonight. I know it's cold and wet and feels really like wintertime now instead of like August like it did last week. Appreciate Ricky reaching out and asking me to speak tonight. There's good news and bad news. I'm not long-winded, but you are stuck listening to me speak tonight. But hopefully we both can learn something in our study here tonight. I want you to think about just your daily life, whether you're at home or work, maybe you're in school, and you're in a conversation with a coworker or a really good friend or maybe your wife or somebody else in your family, and as you're talking, they've said something, you start getting a little mad, right? And you feel your face getting red, you're getting upset maybe you shouldn't be getting upset, but you are, right? Okay? And in your head fills with things that you think, man, I really want to say that to them, and they really need to hear that from me or something. But that's never happened to anybody, right? We've never had those thoughts go through our head or felt that way. Of course we have. It's happened to me. It's happened to you, I'm sure. We live and work in a world full of people, and our families are different people, and day in and day out, we're talking to different people. What I'm thinking about tonight, I want to talk about is self-control. And I did a little studying on this, mainly for myself, and hopefully it can be of use to you as well. But so many times in the Bible, we're told to display self-control. Proverbs 25:28, Galatians 5 and verse 23, 1 Peter 4:7, and many other places. And so as I was thinking and preparing on what to speak, I was, like I said, reflecting on my life, maybe some places that I'm weak. I need to grow maybe as a Christian, as a husband or a father. And so self-control was one of those areas that I felt that I had room for definite improvement on. And so, like I said, hopefully this will help you out and help me as well. And I kind of ended up here because self-control tended to be kind of the root of all these different areas of our life. We're coming up on the end of the year, and maybe you have goals or aspirations, things you want to do in the coming new year. Maybe some of you have New Year's resolutions. These plans and goals are all really good things to have, but ultimately, when you get down to it, if you don't have proper self-control, those plans and goals or even resolutions probably won't make it past either the first week or maybe even past the list that you've made. And so much of the time I feel like we tend to get focused on trying to control what someone else thinks of us, right? Or what someone else is doing, where they're going or not going, or who we think likes us and doesn't like us. And let's face it, if the world thought like you and I did, it'd probably be a better place, right? Because we ourselves think we have the best thoughts and best ideas. And so if everyone was as controlled as we are, it'd be a great place. But we can't control everybody else. And that's part of what we have to focus on is we can't control them. We need to control ourselves. The truth is when you think about trying to control your coworker or your family or your friends, you usually end up disappointed because they don't do the things you wanted them to because they're not you. And we're all different people. We just can't focus on that. We can't focus on trying to control them. We have to focus on controlling our own thoughts and actions, where we're going and who we're thinking about other people, and just forget about who does and doesn't like us. So my efforts to improve on self-control, I wanted to find some examples in the Bible of those who had poor self-control, and so we can learn from their mistakes and what not to do, and also want to look at those in the Bible who had good self-control to learn from their good practices. So if you start thinking about the Bible and people who lacked self-control, you could start all the way back in Genesis and come up with several people really quick there. But the first person I thought of was Moses in Exodus chapter 2. And that was the instance where he found an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. And Moses took the time to look around and see if anyone was watching, anybody was around to see what he was about to do, and there was no one around. So he ended up killing the Egyptian and burying him in the sand. And unfortunately for Moses, someone did see him, but this also wouldn't be the last time that Moses would show a lack of self-control. The instance with Moses that I found to be the most interesting was when he was on Mount Sinai. Moses was up there on the mountain with God several times to come back and forth, and he was up there for a long period of time at one point, and the people got impatient. They were tired of waiting on Moses to come down, and they decided to build an idol, a golden calf. And while Moses was up there, they built this, and God found out about it, and God was angry and again, mad at the people for coming all the way out here just to turn against him. But, and this kind of reminded me that sometimes we get impatient with God ourselves, right? We try to make things happen on our own schedule because of a lack of patience. And it's easy for us to point fingers at the Israelites and at their lack of patience, but we ourselves are often guilty of the same thing. We decide if we just do things the way we want, the world tells us to do them, or the way we want to, it'll turn out better, and we can get it done sooner. But back to the Israelites in Exodus 32, like I said, we see in verses 8 through 11 there that very quickly God gets infuriated with the people for building an idol. But the interesting thing I found there was that Moses intercedes for the people, and he tells God, don't be mad with them. Don't let your anger go down on them, but be patient with them. But then right after that, you go into verse 19, and Moses himself loses control of his anger. He gets just as angry as God was. He breaks the tablets he just carried down the mountain, and he goes to the men of Levi and says to go out and kill their brothers and companions and neighbors and all those people. And I'm not saying that Moses sinned in this loss of self-control or that he necessarily did anything wrong, but it was just interesting to me that, like us, Moses was trying to control God's anger, and yet just a few passages later, we see Moses losing control of his anger. The next person I want to look at is David. And we know David was a man just as we are, and he had very good intentions most of the time and made many wise decisions, such as sparing Saul's life, constantly worshiping God, and always being faithful to God. But he also had his own downfalls. We all know that David was a man after God's own heart, and that he was brave even from childhood when he faced Goliath. And he had many good traits that we often look at as far as leadership, love, and patience. But we also, just as us, David had his downfalls. And we can't forget a few occasions where he definitely lacked in the self-control department. And so while it's easy to look at David and the situation involving Bathsheba and the death of her husband and say, that's terrible, I think it's best that we use as an example to us and try to remember that, that here's David who made this mistake and lacked self-control in this time, but also was still a very good leader. We'll sing a couple more songs here, and we'll come back to finish the lesson up. So previously we looked at Moses and David and some of the mistakes they made and areas they failed in self-control, but I want to look at a couple of good examples from the lives of Paul, and of course we can look at almost any time in the life of Jesus when he exemplified self-control. And while we don't really see an exact example of Paul practicing self-control in the Bible, we do have a couple of verses from Paul about self-control. Let's read from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. And while this example here is to athletes and they're running, he also speaks to those of us who are not exactly what you would call athletic. And he instructs the Corinthians and us to keep our bodies under control. And while he knows that he must keep himself under control for the sake of himself, he also knows that if he is telling others to do this, but he does not do it himself, then he will not be seen as a just man. Just as we will be if we're out preaching and practicing these things, but we're not practicing that and showing that to other people we're around. They're going to say, well, he's saying one thing but doing a different thing. And that's what Paul is saying is, if I'm not really doing what I'm saying, then there's no credit to what I'm saying. But to wrap up the lesson, I want us to talk about a couple of examples of self-control we see from Jesus. This morning in the college class, we were studying the death and resurrection of Lazarus. And Josh pointed out to us that in verse 39 of Luke 11, when Jesus approached the tomb of Lazarus, he did not simply do as he could have and tell the stone to roll away or move the stone without even saying anything, as he could have easily done. But he knew there was a part of of the resurrection that those people could help with and be involved in. And so Jesus realized this, and so he told them to roll the stone away so that he could raise Lazarus from the dead. And this stuck with me, the fact that so much of the time I resort to doing things myself, because usually it's easier to do it yourself. You don't have to tell someone. You don't have to wait on anybody. I'm probably going to do it better than I can tell someone to do it because I know exactly how I want it done. And Jesus could have done the same thing, but he had the self-control and the realization to see that he didn't have to do that. I also want to look at Matthew chapter 4, when Jesus was out in the wilderness fasting for 40 days. And Satan approached him after those 40 days and was there to tempt him. And let's go and read verses 1 through 11 in Matthew chapter 4. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. And now when the tempter came to him, he said, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread." But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "It is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." Again the devil took him up to an exceedingly high mountain, and showed him all of the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, his angels came and ministered to him. So here we see that Satan tempted Jesus 3 times after he'd been fasting in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. We see that Satan first tempted Jesus with food after 40 days of not having food. Jesus still told Satan no. Next, Satan offered Jesus to have control over angels and God, and Jesus resists this temptation as well. And lastly here we see that Satan tempts Jesus with trying to offer him power and wealth, and still Jesus denied him of this temptation. Now we know that Jesus didn't need Satan's temptations to do these things, as he could have easily done these things whenever he wanted. But Jesus had the ultimate self-control to refuse to do the things which Satan wanted him to do. One of the best ways for us to gain and practice self-control is in our prayers. As Zach spoke to us about on Wednesday night, it's important for us to keep prayer first and foremost in our lives. Far too often we like to keep prayer kind of tucked away, right? We kind of keep it until we need it, kind of like a spare tire. We don't need a spare tire until we really need it. And I think it's important that we, in our self-control practices, in our daily lives, we keep prayer as our steering wheel, keep it right up front, in front of everything, and guiding us in our daily lives. And whether we need prayer in a time of struggle, as Zach mentioned, or maybe just sickness or a lack of self-control, it's important that we pray about it first and foremost. Because first it takes self-control to realize and take the time to pray. And compounding on that, it takes self-control to realize and be patient for answers to that prayer. Or to realize that maybe the answer was not what we wanted it to be from that prayer. The other way to practice self-control is to commit our lives to following God's word each and every day. Will this be an easy thing to do? Likely not, or we would all be doing it perfectly every day anyways. And are we going to have days and times where we fail to have self-control? Unfortunately, yes. But thank God that Jesus did not have those days where he failed at self-control, so that through him we can have forgiveness on the days we do come up short. As we get ready to sing another song, I want to ask you, have you had the self-control that you should have? Maybe you've reached a point in your life where you realize you need to put on Christ in baptism. As Ricky mentioned this morning, there's a time in our lives where we realize we need to bury our old sinful self and be born again as a clean, fresh man without sin. Maybe you've already been buried. Maybe you've already buried that old man many years ago, but you realize that over the years you've strayed away from the truth, and you need prayers for forgiveness. Whatever we can do for you, come as we stand and sing.